Well, welcome, Glennis. I feel so grateful to have you here for a dialogue today. Um, you have so many things I could say by way of introduction, but I just want to say that for me, what feels like the most moving is that you have been such a standout example of an elder in my life in a spiritual sense that I've had so few, and especially so few women. And um, I've gotten to do four of the Wheel of the Year ceremonies with you, all of the cross quarters, which felt like a beautiful completion right before our little one was born. And in different places as well. We did some in Queensland, some in New South Wales, one online. Um, and yeah, you've dedicated your being. I don't want to just say your career because it's your being. You've dedicated, your whole life in a very holistic sense to embodying the teachings and the wisdom that you realized really mattered and bloomed into this um, baby that you've called Pagayan cosmology. So I wanted to introduce you that way as a rare and exquisite elder in my life. So thank you so much for being that to me and enjoying your beautiful summery yellow festive clothing as we're just out of summer solstice here. Yeah. Um, and I like to open by asking if you would please share something about a land or a place that has meaning to you anywhere on this beautiful Mother Earth. And then we'll try to put some images up so that people can get a visual of this place. So, what's coming to you? What beautiful place is coming to you to share?
Well, Valerie, I feel honored to be that elder in your life, and it's always really gratifying and wonderful that young ones um, pick up on it and take it further and combine it into your amazing work. Um, so I feel honored, and it is really good for me to speak with you at this time, summer solstice in our place, in our hemisphere, and when there's so much winter metaphor going on at the moment,
Yeah.
it can drive me crazy. So it's a real pleasure to speak with you, knowing that you also practice according to your place.
Yes.
Um, Now, your question, there's a lot of places, really, there's a few places that come to mind that are special to me. I speak to you from Waka Waka country.
Mm.
And as I drive down the hill, I live on a bit of a hill in the town. And as I drive down the hill, I see what's called Mount Warulin. And I actually don't know its indigenous name.
Mm.
And I don't know anyone who does. I'm sure somebody must.
Mm.
Mount Warulin, but it's for me, it's my holy mountain,
Mm.
And I knew it as I grew up. It's just Mount, we used to go up there as kids. Didn't think anything. Well, mostly the boys did because it was okay for boys to wander in the wild, but not so much for girls.
Mm.
But I see it. It's a vision, and it looks like it looks a lot like Glastonbury Tor, actually,
Mm.
same shape.
Mm.
So I consider that my holy mountain in the local region.
Mm.
And then there have been moments in my life uh, in this place. Um, I went to high school. It was about 45 minutes drive from here to the north, at the foot of what is called Boat Mountain. And I didn't know then that it is actually the site of an amazing fossils that are
Mm.
unique to the whole planet.
Mm.
A- um, and they have built a museum there now. But anyway, that's where I lived, at the foot of this mountain.
Mm.
And I had a couple of experiences there in that place. As I sat on the front veranda of the little wooden house that we lived in.
Mm.
And it was with the sun, deep time experiences, which of course I didn't have the language for then.
Right.
So there was a couple of experiences there, and then the other special place on the planet is Brunaboyne. That's the Indigenous name for Newgrange,
Mhm.
and where the triple spiral is lit up in the chamber.
Mm.
So that's a special place for me, which I actually got to visit last year and see it with my own eyes
Yeah, for the first time?
for the first time.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
So if that, yes, those places.
It's so fitting too that you do so much in threes in the triple spiral, and then you just told us 3 places. It's just part of your embodiment of your teachings. I love it, Glennis.
Can't
Um,
help myself. Hey.
well, I'll close the dialogue by saying a bit about a piece of land here, and nothing's coming to me at the minute, so we'll just let your 3 simmer. But I really was excited to talk to you because you have this whole huge body of work. If people aren't familiar, and we'll link your website and to some of your books in the YouTube notes. Your Pagayan work, which in itself is such a beautiful word that you um, created, and from my German roots, right? We're constantly putting words together, but I love the way you put pagan and Gaia together in that. Um, could you just, for people who aren't familiar with your work, could you just try to give a basic framework for how you landed on this cosmology concept? I mean, people might have heard of cosmology or ontology or axiology or all these words, but if they're not in academia, they might not kind of know like what does that really mean?
Yeah, yeah. Yes, well, I chose to call it a cosmology. As soon as it was my partner who came up with the term Pagayan, because I didn't have a word for it. It took 6 lines to describe what I was doing. So, which was great when I was given my PhD, and they had to. It took up a lot of space in their program, and I was very pleased with that.
Right.
But it didn't work for publication. So after he coined the term Pagayan, as soon as he said it, the lights came on, and I said, "Yes, that's what it is." And it's a cosmology. I said straight away, it's a cosmology because it's about a place,
Hmm.
this cosmos.
Hmm.
Yeah. So that's really. It's not. I didn't think it's not a theology, although I was a student of theology. I did have an MA in theology and philosophy. That was
Right.
where that's how I knew what I wanted to leave. You got to know that you got to know, and then you can go. and,
Right.
and so it wasn't a theology. It wasn't even a theology, which a lot of feminist theologians do, or goddess women coin that term theology.
Hmm.
It wasn't a study of a deity. It was poetry, but it was about a place primarily, a cosmos. So that's why I use that word.
Hmm. Oh, I like that. It wasn't really an academic kind of meaning of the different words. It was really just connecting with the essence of the cosmos word. Yeah.
Yeah, yes, yes, and you know, I had been very influenced by Brian Swim and Thomas Berry,
Hmm.
and all that cosmology, and the study of the universe, the story of the universe, and its
Mm.
unfolding, cosmogenesis. So I was sort of grounded in that, as well as the goddess framework. So it was a combination of that.
Mm. It's really interesting as I have a little one now, as you know, who's 2.5, and we're starting to be able to have certain conversations and tell certain stories. But from the way I was raised, I wasn't really given a creation story, so to speak. It was just sort of implicit. Like I remember I have this very odd memory of being in a doctor's office when I was like 5 or 6 with my dad, and they had like a children's Bible. Mind you, I grew up in the South in the US. Of course, that was just in the doctor's waiting room. And I read the story of Adam and Eve for the first time. And I shut the book and I turned to my dad and I said, "People believe this?" And he said, "Shh."
How old were you? How old were you?
I was about 6.
Oh, that's lovely.
But I have this really strong memory of that because it was a very first exposure to me of a creation story as well. And it wasn't like my dad gave me an alternative. He might have talked about the Big Bang or something like that, but there wasn't really a something else as much as it was it's not this. We don't believe this. I'm wondering in your journey, um, how did you sort of move into understanding like creation stories and this idea of where we came from, and when did that come to you, or did that change for you over time when you were a kid to an adult to your iterations now?
Yes, well, I was thinking this morning about, well, I have thought about how I really wasn't told very much at all.
Mm,
We were sent, at some point, we were sent to Sunday school. I remember going to Sunday school. I remember going with my sister sometimes. And we went to the Salvation Army Sunday school, first off. We used to walk up there.
mm,
Um, so I guess that's where I first heard about, Jesus and God, right? That was it.
mm,
And we certainly weren't given any cultural heritage of any other description. And then at some point we changed from the Salvation Army to the Presbyterians, because
mhm,
that was my father was, I guess, by name at least, a Presbyterian, but it
mm,
didn't mean much to any of them.
mm,
Um, and my mother was a nominal Catholic, Bush Catholic, so it means she didn't know anything about her Catholicism. Actually, she was
mm.
just baptized. But Presbyterian was it, and nobody else went to church. The family didn't go to church. We were just sent. But I, of course, was a star student. I learned all my, things, and I got prizes at the Sunday school for learning
Right.
all these things. But I can remember, the fire and brimstone stories, the
Mm,
scary bits. So I guess I swallowed it all pretty much, and then I turned into a zealous little Christian hippie,
mm.
but I was of the hippie variety. So it was, Jesus was the radical outlaw.
Okay.
So I moved into that in the late '60s. When there was I was a hippie
Mm,
child, really, a flower girl, a flower child.
yeah.
So Jesus was, I had a poster. Jesus was the outlaw, and that was so I was a Jesus freak. I used to hand out papers on the street,
Okay.
go to the Jesus coffee shop.
Right.
But then I think I got pregnant, of course, as we do,
Mhm.
and and but it wasn't okay. So I went away, an unmarried mother.
Mm, mm,
But in that time, I had this experience of knowing that suddenly, as I sat in a church, there was this awareness that if the deity was female, it would all be different.
mm.
So I just had this flash because, I was still a zealous little Christian. I'd formed a Christian community. I was one of the founding people in this Christian community that we founded.
All right.
And we used to do the folk masses. So we were part of parish and the archdiocese, really.
Mm,
Uh, and I had made the decision. We even went to the Archbishop and asked him whether we should come out in the open with this. A stupid thing to do, eh? To ask the Archbishop. Of course, the answer is no, go away. So, the church was a significant place for me to be. And it was suddenly I had this flash that if the deity was female, it would all be different.
mm.
So that was one of the turning points of knowing and yet not knowing. And even being pregnant itself was like, what? I was I was told that I was dead and inert. And it's very secular.
Feels different.
But
Right.
this is like something has happened. Something can grow in me, for heaven's sakes. So
Mm,
those experiences, that was radicalizing, even though I didn't know it at the time. It was
mm.
later that I put words on those experiences.
Right.
And when I did put words on those experiences, of course, reading Mary Daly, Beyond God the Father, and
Mm.
Starhawk, and then I was out of there. You know,
Mm.
got to do something different here. Got to
Mm.
jump the fence. It's not even the best that the church had to offer, and I was amongst some of the best. The most radical people in the church,
Yeah.
who were
I bet
wonderful people, but it wasn't enough for me. I wanted a different party. You
your
know.
spirit wasn't fulfilled.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so that was 79. I made that decision to leave, jump the fence, and
Mm.
and that's when I read Maria Jimbudas. I was reading Maria Jimbudas by then.
Mm.
It was a rare book and had to be sent from Sydney to the regional New South Wales. So I had to sit in the library and read it. And that was the beginning of learning the story of the Great Mother.
Mm. It's so interesting. You've had this very strong sense of knowing that you need to be a spiritual leader for a really long time. It sounds like you just went in the more understandable, more closer to mainstream outlet and then went, oh, that won't work. Now I've got a journey. What's next?
Yeah, well, it was also, going to the Northern Hemisphere where I did study theology in
Mhm.
Berkeley, California, and experiencing winter solstice at Christmas and winter solstice.
Right.
Oh, that's what it's supposed to be about.
Right. All of a sudden, all the fake snow in the windows makes more sense. Maybe not in Berkeley, but
So, when I got back to Australia, it's like, no way. I'm not going to do this in the middle of summer.
yeah.
And that was 1988. And I had begun to read Starhawk's book, The Spiral Dance. So I knew there was, the wheel. I had become familiar with what could be done, what I could do, where I could start. Yeah.
Did you have some elders in human form that did ceremonies like I was describing? You were able to hold the space for me. Glennis, I have so few people in my life who can hold space for me, and Lucas and I talk about it quite a bit, especially because we do ceremony and hold space for others quite a lot. And then I'll get a number of more Western minded people who will act like or think they can hold space. And I'm like, I don't feel like you see me. I really don't feel like you see me. I don't feel like you're holding me. Thanks for trying. But, you're seeing chunks of me missing, and I couldn't, be that intimate with you as you seem to think I can. I'm wondering if you've had some of those, I'm guessing, elder women in your life that were actually physically there able to ceremonially hold some space that you'd like to honor and talk about.
Yes, I think it is rare. It is rare to have space held like ceremony for me is like that. To have space held for me like that. Um, I guess I experienced it with Starhawk.
Mhm.
She's not around here.
Yeah,
So, but in the early days, there were a few experience. That was where I got a taste.
what it could feel like. Yeah.
Yes, that's right. And then, oddly enough, what comes to mind? Well, also I want to mention um, Patricia Corner, who used
Mhm.
to run the Gaia conferences in
Mhm.
the early, like 2008, I think it was. Before, I don't know how long. Um, she used to. The goddess, what's it called? Goddess Association in Australia, Gaia conferences. Patricia knew how to hold space.
Mhm.
And and then the other experiences I had was in the women church community, which was in Sydney in
Mhm.
the late 80s. We as a group, as women, that we did do good ceremony, good rituals as a group. There wasn't a particular one that stands out, but we knew how to do it as a group,
Mhm.
hold space, a
Mhm.
ceremony, sacred space. And then oddly enough, that when an experience that comes to mind that was really informative for me was a man I knew who was used to be able to speak poetry, Rumi, and he knew it by heart,
Hmm.
and he could hold space because he did it with groups of people, and I could see the magic. They just loved it, and so it was a way of holding space with the poetry.
Right.
Uh, yes, only those experience, but it's rare these days for someone to do that. Yeah.
There's an elder who I haven't personally met, but I did ceremonies in the U.S. with a lot number of people who he taught because he retired before I came along. And his name is Joseph Rayal, or Beautiful Painted Arrow. One of his teachings is that at any given time, there may only be 100 or so people on the planet who are actually, from his perspective, spiritually holding space for everybody else, for all of humanity, because there's just to in whatever tradition anyone's in, to get to such a depth of being able to sit with pain and discomfort and have the empathy and bring the compassion and not bringing any of that existential judgment into the space is such a
Yeah.
hard gift to hone that very few people on the planet have the time, capacity, and skills to really get to a depth with it.
As you speak, I remember also, I just close this
Mm.
window here. There's a
Yeah, sure.
bit of noise out there. Um, as you speak, the other experience, the other person who comes to mind that I tasted, holding space was Jean Houston.
Mm.
Uh, and there was also a woman who learned from Jean Houston who held amazing, beautiful space in a significant workshop I did on Inanna. But I'm not in touch with her anymore. Um, and I
Mm.
can hardly remember her name because it was early 1991. But Jean
Right,
Houston was a significant person in terms of teaching me and giving me the experience of. It was huge with huge numbers of people. Of course, she had, sometimes a couple of hundred in a space. But
right,
I learned how to do it. She could do it with that many people with a little bit of assistance. She had a group of people assisting her.
right.
So that was a significant experience of ceremony with Jean Houston. Yes.
Mm. What's so interesting, I mean, you've been able to pull a number of people, but you have held space for hundreds of people, um, and you held, physical ceremonial space at Moon Court for what, over 20 years, in the Blue Mountains. And I don't know if you have any idea how many people you've held ceremonial space for at this point, do you?
Oh, I should do a count, shouldn't I?
But yeah, I just want to say there's something that just feels so moving about that givingness that you've been able to find that connection on your own with the earth and with all of the goddess spirit energy that you relate to, that you are able to gift economy that outwards to others without having had that reciprocity very much coming and brought you up in it. Um, so I just want to take a moment to say I find that really moving, Glynis, and um, maybe you would like to speak a bit to some of the how. How have you found ways to, um, connect with some of these spirit energies that has filled you up and allowed you to share? And you talked a little about some land places that have been important to you, but part of what I love about your Pagayan work is how connected it is to the earth, and how it's in that Indigenous science framework. It's it's not what my husband calls a suitcase religion that you can pack up and do anywhere. You you can have some basic concepts, right? The sun cycle works everywhere on the planet, but then you have to make it real in your specific context too, right? Like that's the dichotomy of it.
Yes.
What has sort of helped you find a lot of this energy? I know you've done a lot of work with different goddess spirits, so maybe you want to speak to that, but what has helped you sort of be able to find that that spiritual ballast to run all of these ceremonies and facilitate people literally around the world to practice these cycles and get back into some of these basic earth grounded teachings?
There's a couple of things that come to mind. I mean, the experience of holding the ceremonial space with the people that I did in Moon Court, particularly, um, it was always there's always a receiving in the giving,
Sure, sure.
and so I needed to do it. They needed to do it. They
Yes.
wanted it. So their desire for it was important, and so in that there's an interaction of, and sometimes I would get to, as I went round the circle, speak to each one, and it was always different for each one, even though the transmission was the same. But so there's
There is
always
a reciprocity in the
yeah,
community.
there's a reciprocity in
Yes,
experience,
sure.
and that was true also in the very earliest ceremonial circles that I held. I facilitated in the Restorian goddess classes. I really, we did inform. I mean, I was facilitating it, and yes, I had quite a bit of information, but and what I was drawing forth was their stories, and they were so we were informing each other, and that's where it grew from those women who participated in those early circles. So
Yeah.
that I guess I was fed by that, and then there were 4 or 5 significant women who were the drummers in the um,
Mm.
in the dissertation, the doctoral process,
Right.
uh, and they, so they were important women that fed me uh, as much as I fed them. And then I think, oh, the other thing that comes to mind is a daily practice.
Yeah.
Uh, and that's why I use the word religion, because it is, it's not just, so some people say, oh, spirituality, yeah, well, okay, but it's a religion because it's a practice. It's a
Hmm.
people will say, oh, I was religious about that. Yeah, well, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
um, so
Right.
there's a daily practice of connecting,
Hmm.
however that is for you. But for me, uh, well, I don't need to go into it too much, but it's an acknowledgement of where I am, and an
Hmm.
invocation. I do a daily invocation of the triple goddess,
Yep.
uh,
And you have altars that you
and
tend.
altars. Yes, yeah. Oh, and if I need strong medicine, I've often sat in the middle of my wheel of stones. So I
Right.
have a small wheel of stones and that's on the front of my book. Now
Hmm.
they're famous. My stones are famous now. I tell them, but yeah. So I have sat sometimes in the middle of. I spread them out on the floor and sit in the middle of them. But yes, it's a daily practice, and it's a practice connected to where we are, where I am,
Hmm.
that has sustained me, and that I think people need to do.
Yeah, it's interesting because I was talking with somebody who started looking at my book and she said, "Oh, well, I did this practice for 3 weeks and nothing changed." And
Oh,
I didn't I was just, like, so taken aback by that comment that I didn't even have anything that come to me to say initially because I'm thinking, I've done some practices for 15 years that I'm starting to really see bear fruit now. Like, I had to dig through a lot of muck in the roots and, like, work my way to planting the seed, and it's like, um,
Yes. Yes.
yeah, it requires a lot of dedication and patience, and I'm interested if you have anything coming to you about maybe a moment where you were wrestling with yourself about, oh, is this, path for me? Is this worth it? Am I missing something? Was there a wrestling moment where you had to push yourself out of a hole at any point?
Oh, well, I think the hole I fell into was pretty early on. Uh, After I started, because I say it was 1988, I first started just, dipping my toes into the wheel in my place. And everything, my life fell apart. It was 1992, my life fell apart. And I think I did throw everything in the bin at that point. I was like, oh, well, what was the use of all of that? Because
Mhm.
but then, I didn't know, but I hadn't really done very much at that point. Um, so throwing, whatever it was that I had in the bin was, probably it was a good idea.
Obviously, yeah.
So my life fell apart, and as I say in my book, I was fortunate, and I've heard others say that. Maybe it was you, but I was fortunate. My life did fall apart.
Mhm.
No, it was another woman recently, and that was the early '90s, and so it took some time. And then there was a significant workshop I did with a group of women. I was invited. So, all right, okay. So I was invited to come back into the circle.
Mm.
Will you please do a workshop on restoring goddess?
Mhm.
Right. So that was a step back into. It was an
Mm.
invitation. Um, yes, and it was an amazing group of women that I worked with at what was called the Women's Academy in Sydney.
Okay. Hmm.
Um, it took years, yes, of reconstruction, emerging from the slime, the compost,
Yeah.
and different people along the way, who saw something more in me that called me forth.
Mm.
And yes,
And a lot of, loss, I imagine, along the way, where
yes,
you
yes.
work with someone, you get close to something, and then you realize you've gone as far as you can, and you need to.
Yes, yes, there's that. Yes, needing groups and things. We had a women's moon circle, and it passed. There was a time when it finished. But
Yeah.
it was a significant and important group of women that I was with. But it did need to finish at some point and move on. And
Mhm.
then there was another person who was a teacher that I didn't mention was Thea Gaia. She was a significant woman in the early days of Goddess in Australia. And so we shared a lot of stuff, but that at some point finished as well. Although as years later at the Gaia conferences, we sort of reconnected, so there was reconciliation. But yes, there are other
Yeah.
losses.
Those touch points where you go in your different directions, and
Yes,
yeah.
yes, and sometimes that's very hard, and it's not, and sometimes it's not really anything personal. You
Yeah.
just need to go in different directions.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like part of being in the seasons and the cycles is, capacity to weather, right? Like, just like every other aspect of nature, we have to be able to weather different
Right.
storms,
Yes.
and different a limb falls off our tree and whatever it is, right? Like, hmm.
Yes, yes, that's right. So you get to live, well, speak personally, you get to live the story more deeply. So, you sort of I've been doing this for an X number of, years and whatnot. And then,
Yeah.
you know, I don't feel very good about something, or, I'm having a drama of some kind. But yes, it's sort of, you get to live the story. Okay, I've been telling this story. I've been telling this story of transformation now for some time. This is what transformation feels like. Uh.
Let me remind myself. That's right.
Yes, yeah, especially as now at this time in my life, as I age and definitely on the transformation path, it doesn't feel so good. But
I
hmm,
wanted to ask you about the transformation experience you had becoming an elder, sort of noticing you recognizing you've been in a leadership role for quite a while when you were at Moon Court. And maybe in some ways you were a spiritual elder when you were a lot younger, but that sense of fully embodying eldership in that way we do when we're actually physically, older as well and looking our part for our wisdom.
yeah, yeah. At the checkout, they don't have to ask me for my seniors card.
Yeah.
I've already got it.
I mean, in some ways, I feel like if I project that and it might be easier, more people might listen to certain things that you have to say. So
Oh, yeah.
there.
Okay. I must remember to use that.
Yeah, but I'm just wondering about sort of this transition of becoming that conscious elder and recognizing that aspect of your journey into crone. If you would share a little bit about your journey.
Hmm. Yeah, well, it's only fairly recent that I feel like, well, yeah, an acknowledgement that, yes, I have become a teacher. It was kind of a gradual process of, well, being invited into the circle of my teachers,
Mhm.
um, and feeling like, oh, wow, here I am sitting in the circle, or invited into uh, contributing to an anthology wherein my teachers. So it was kind of like, oh, right, okay. So stepping into that, um, but still not feeling like I was really, a teacher. But I guess I have accepted that recently. Uh, so yes, okay, I have that role, and I'm now more conscious of that role. So even though I can't physically do a lot as much as I used to do, and I think there's still a lot to do, but I can't physically do it. Um, I'm more conscious that I contribute my whatever it is I have to say. I have become more conscious of speaking, um, and caring less
Mhm.
about what
Not
people.
worrying what people think, right?
Yeah. So I'm like, well, this is just the way it is, and it's got to be said. Do what you like with it. And,
Right.
yes, so there is more of that, and that's fairly recent, really. Probably even only in the last couple of years at the
Mhm.
most,
Okay.
of arriving at that place of accepting that role, and probably increasingly so. Mm.
But creating a legacy too seems to be a big part of your
Yeah.
efforts at the moment. Yeah,
Like recently, I've got files in the garage,
sure.
which I have gone through, but and I've got these files from my PhD, uh, and I thought, oh, what? I don't need those anymore. I can, throw those out surely. Then I started going through them, and I thought, oh, I could write a whole article. So, or it's like because I've got the actual notes of the processes of each of the sabbats. The processes from Salween, the
Right.
processes. So it's how I arrived at what I arrived at. It's the process of it there in those files, and I thought, no, I can't throw those out. I actually might even at some point use them to write more.
It's very interesting and challenging to write about the process of how we
Yeah.
move through and get to things. It's valuable. I agree with you. It's very intimate kind of sharing to share process.
It is really, yes, because some of it's quite intimate stuff, and it's sort of have to be discerning about what I can actually write in public. Yes.
Yeah. When you now can look back at the different periods of your work, do you sort of feel like, oh, this was a moment where I was really focused on this piece, and this was a moment where I was more focused on this piece, or do you still feel like you have eras in that way when you look back,
Mm.
or does it not feel that defined?
Yes, I don't think I have it defined as certain eras. Um,
It's more layered and spiraled.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I do feel like, I knew nothing. I knew nothing. It's uh, a country girl, a country
Mhm.
girl who'd been given nothing, a wild thing, and I guess as I've gotten older and I reflect, I still don't know who I am. Oh, that's who I am. Oh,
Mhm.
yes, right. So I get more perspective on, this being that I was, this child that grew up in the country and ate lots of red dirt. So that was my best cultural education that I got, was eating the red dirt.
Right.
And although we did have, my mother bought encyclopedias, so I did have books that I read, but I think I basically I knew nothing.
Mm.
So I do these different stages. I can see different stages of awareness, knowledge, growing, wake up times, times of wake up. Dreams have been important in that process of speaking to me. So I guess I've always listened to those realms.
The
But that would
messages.
seem to me the best. My mother says my first words were "I scared," so I think that was very sensible assessment of the situation.
Right.
You know, to be scared
Right. That's
and
very interesting. Yeah. I
uh,
mean, your colonial ancestors, do you know how many generations were in Australia before you?
yes, actually, I've lost a little bit of the count, but my great great grandmother Jane,
Okay.
Isabella. So that's great. But Jane wasn't. So it was Isabel was the first one born here, and then Winifred, my grandmother, then my mother, and then me. So I'm fourth generation in that line.
Okay.
Um, and in this region, the Bunya Mountains is significant. That's where my mother grew up, and they're not far from here. I can see them from here.
Right.
Um, yeah, I think the colonial thing, and the men, my father and his brother and their friends. I think they were a scary lot.
Mhm.
I think they thought they owned the world, and that's how they operated.
Practically
World
opposite.
was theirs, and they
Mhm.
could do what they liked.
Mhm.
And significant in this place is that not far from here is Cherbourg, the Aboriginal, where the Aboriginals were sent and
Mhm.
camped, and it was I don't know what they called it, but anyway, that it was curfew. So, and my father was a taxi driver.
Mhm.
So he would often be taking the Aboriginal people back to Cherbourg before 10
Right.
or something like that.
Sort
And
of a township. Right.
so, but he and my mother were actually fairly good relationship, relatively speaking, with the Aboriginal people because, that he would often accept payment with a guitar or a transistor radio or a piece of artwork. So he would accept that, and he would take them on long journeys out west where they had work, and he would
Mhm.
bring them home first and give them a pie, so they wouldn't have to stop. But so there was a fairly good relationships, really speaking.
For
But
the time, sure. Yeah.
but I know that. I'm related. I'm related by DNA to a lot of the Sherbrooke people, you know,
Right.
because, you know, his brother was, yeah, it's,
Okay.
yes. Not my father, but my brother, his brother.
Your uncle. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, there was, yeah, so, and, I mean, that was the attitude. And my mother was, you know, quite subservient, really.
Yeah.
It was a scary thing to witness. You know, children learn so much from the primary relationship. People are unaware of how much the child is actually learning from the primary relationship they see in their
The
house,
dynamics in the home.
the
Yeah, of
nuclear
course.
family. So that's why, you know, it was important for me, for instance, when I got together with my partner, that he had his primary experience with aunties and mothers, and it was
Mhm.
women who raised him.
Right.
I thought, oh, yeah, that's a good psychology. Okay. But so there was a lot, you know, watching that relationship.
Mm.
Yes. Yes. And it was in the context of colonialism, really. That wasn't spoken, but, you know, it was there.
You witnessed it, of course.
Yes.
Was there any sense of cultural identity in the sense of being Irish or English or Welsh or Scottish or anything around you when you grew up? Was there any sense of those roots?
Well, I think, yes. Well, actually, I wasn't very aware of it, but there was quite a strong Scottish. And I'd found out later that it was, but no one spoke of it, that it was my grandfather, my father's father,
Mm.
Hughie MacDiarmid Livingston, uh, had founded the Caledonian Society
Okay.
locally. And so he was a significant, you know, person in the community,
Hmm.
but it wasn't talked a lot about. And I did see a photo of him in his kilt.
Okay.
And I used to love, you know, we did have street parades, and we had a peanut festival, so we
Right.
participated.
Right.
And the bands, it was just always a pipe band, and I loved it. So I was very attracted to the pipe bands and the
Something
Scottish.
about the culture. Yeah. Yeah.
So
For
it
sure.
was there, and I felt attracted to it. And I found out later that, you know, my DNA, I'm about 60% Scot.
Right.
And it doesn't all come from my father. It actually
Right.
comes through my mother's line as well, which was a surprise.
Well, in your cosmology, and I'm interested in how you chose to name your holidays and the Wheel of the Year. You use mostly Celtic
Mm.
names. Was it something that came to you, or how did that sort of happen?
Well, I really got it from Starhawk's
Okay,
naming. So, and I just took that really from her. Um,
just for people to be familiar.
yes. So really, you know, I come out of her reclaiming tradition to some extent, although I didn't continue in her. But that's where I get the names from. Yeah, and I understand that there are other ways of naming those.
Oh yeah, I was just
Yeah,
curious. You didn't grow up listening to any Gaelic or
yeah, and some people want to argue with me about that, but you know, that's the way they are in my books now. So you know,
yeah.
yeah.
It's I mean, we can name things as it feels better to us. That's not a big deal. Sure. Yeah, no, that's interesting. I thought perhaps you grew up hearing Gaelics or something and had
No, no, I wasn't so blessed. But, you know, I had a friend, a girlfriend in high school who did speak Gaelic. You know, I she was regarded, of course, as a nerd or something, but you know, she actually did know a lot. And I think she regarded me as kind of a little bit, but you know, we were friends. She used to listen to the ABC and she could speak Gaelic. I should have listened to her more.
well, it's interesting because so I grew up just speaking English, and then I wanted to learn German, but because my mom didn't speak it, my parents had such a dynamic that my dad didn't teach us. But it was a bit present German in the home. We we'd hear songs or we'd have books in German, but he'd sort of translate them as he read them or something. And then I'd hear him talk to his relatives. So then I went to a school where I could learn German and I was very interested and I really got into it. I found it quite easy to learn. It really came to me. Um, and then much later, German in the colonial layers, right? That what we call German now is actually really a mishmash of different Germanic languages that got put together, but primarily comes from southern Germany, from the Alp region there, because they were sort of the more powerful social group when Germany was being united as a country. So my people, we're called like plot, like flat, because we're from like flat marshes in the north of the country, like the opposite of the mountains. So there's a language called Plattdeutsch, which is like flat German, which actually has a different cadence and some different words. And then when I started hearing plot and hearing songs in plot, my heart went, oh, but that's more my language, but it's quite hard to learn and not spoken as much, etc. And then I sort of dug deeper again, and most of our Frisian language has been lost. There's a version of it in the Netherlands spoken that's kind of mixed with Dutch, and then there's a version of it spoken in one little part of Germany. And I listened to that and I thought, oh, I'm somewhere in between that and plot, but it's like my language that my heart really wants to speak isn't quite there anymore on the the land. It's been hidden, like the way Gaelic has been slowly disappearing in the generations, even in the country where it emerged. Um, but I've been trying to teach my little 2-year-old German because it feels like a something, like a connection to a something. And she seems quite interested. So I've been doing some songs and things in German. Um, but I feel like to some extent it's like the best I've got. And I'm curious if you have any of that around language. Have you ever had these experiences of like, oh, well, this word or this something feels a bit better and I'm stuck with all this English? Do you have that experience as well ever?
Yes, I don't think I even thought about a different language until I went to high school, and we were all going to learn French, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
but I wanted to learn German, so it was offered German because I thought at that time that I had German heritage,
Mm-hmm.
which turns out I don't have a lot of. But so I did learn German then, and I could speak the poetry. I used to love the German poetry. It was
Yeah.
Hochdeutsch, High German, as it's called. Um, and then I found that when I actually went to Germany and wanted to practice speaking German, they all wanted to practice their English.
Right.
But whenever I'm around people who speak German, I pick it up really quick. It
Mm-hmm.
comes back to me, and I actually did have to translate. For my master's, I had to translate German theology, and I was able to do it only because I knew who I could see, I could intuit who the theologian was, and I knew what he was saying. So I could. Um, but whenever I'm around people who speak a different language of any kind, almost, I start to mimic them. But certainly when I'm around German-speaking people, it comes back, and I start to speak it too.
That's interesting. I mean, if you go further back, right, there were a lot of Germanic peoples who populated the islands we call the UK and Ireland now, right? So perhaps farther back, you have those.
Yes, yes. Well, that's right. And I actually feel a lot of connection, to the Indian, the East Indian. I've always worn clothes, you know, like the Indian women. That's
Mm-hmm.
just what I like to wear. And so and there is a connection to the Indo-European, in way back there.
Certainly, yeah.
And one of my close friends comes from India, East India, and I consider her almost, one of my teachers. She regards me that way, but
Mm.
so there's quite a connection there, and there's other significant people in India, in South India, uh,
Mhm.
who have been and are significant. So there's a connection there, but I don't speak that language at all.
Right.
Um,
It's a something. It's a
yes, it is. And then, I had the privilege of going to Korea,
Mm.
uh, co-facilitating the goddess Margot pilgrimage in 2014. And so, I got connected to some of the land there and some of the people.
Mhm.
Um, and there are similarities even there, some things, the way things are done there with Ireland, really, which is interesting.
Yeah.
Those people up in the north would have, traveled across. So,
Mm. So much knowledge sharing at this point everywhere. But that's one of the things I love about the earth cultures anywhere is how even people we can't really think about how they might have been connected will have
mm,
some of the same ceremonies or some of the same stories about like Pleiades star systems or things like that where we're like, that's so beautiful that that knowledge was derived in all these different places and people have been honoring that. Yeah.
yeah. There's a woman who has emerged into my life in the last year or two, who is an Aboriginal woman who is doing the solstices and equinoxes in a small island just off the east coast of Brisbane, Alcaringa, and she
Mhm.
combines my work with her knowledge of women's law.
Oh,
So
right.
it's quite an amazing thing that she's doing, and I hope to experience and go to one of those ceremonies. But yes, she has a lot of knowledge of her
And
ancestry.
weaving is, I feel like that's so much of what is needed because most of us are multicultural, whether it's by our ancestors or by living or having born on a land where our ancestors aren't from, or just like you were talking about India, just feeling connections to cultures or places we can't logically explain. We're
Yes,
all so
yes,
blending at the moment and needing to weave,
yes,
yeah, knowledge and ceremony together and try to honor all of it. Yeah.
yes. Yeah, yeah. I do like your book as well. For helping people to do that. You know. Yes.
Thank you. It feels like my mission. I mean, I'm very much more of a mutt than you, but
Oh, much. You mean you mean a blend of lots of things? Is that
yes.
right? A Heinz variety. Well,
Right. Very different ancestry trying to talk to each other. I'm just curious if before we close, have is there anything about your ancestors that you have had some experience that you would share, maybe in a dream or a vision or just an experience where you were sort of like, oh, that was a message from somebody?
yeah. Well, I think first off of my grandmother, uh, because I do have this feeling. I didn't, she didn't tell me a lot, and I didn't, but I had significant experiences, I suppose, staying at her place when I was a child, and it was, roughly hewn. It wasn't lined. The house wasn't lined. It was a wooden, unpainted structure. She was a dairy farmer. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but she did tell me a story that, she wanted to join the circus when she was 14. So, and I guess that impressed me somehow, because years later, I felt like I was living her dreams.
Mm, that's beautiful. Mm.
Um, so I often, connect with my grandmother, and I have written about that somewhere, that, I had this vision of her in the fields, hoping that someone, one of her descendants maybe would.
Would
Uh,
pick up that thread.
I mean, she didn't see the ocean until she was 45.
Right.
And when she first saw the ocean and she saw a ship's smokestack out on the horizon, she said, "Oh, they're burning off out there."
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So she was like an indigenous woman in many ways. The land, that's what was in her.
Right.
And yet she did have this dream that she would love to. She was had a wildness in her that wanted to go to the circus, join the circus.
Right.
So I joined the circus.
Go traveling, exploring, and something else. Yeah.
Yeah, she got a taste of something that, there's a world out there. Uh,
Right.
so that's a significant connection with, with her
Hmm.
still, really. Uh, I think of her often and what her life was like. And it was very different from what was acceptable, really, and what people are willing to talk about. But
Right.
I know something, and I often think of her.
And just how sometimes we only have experiences that become possible based on virtue of where society is open in a certain time that we happen to be alive.
There have been window periods, I've stepped through windows that closed behind me.
Yeah.
So yes, there is a time, sometime, and I was fortunate. Those windows were just there,
Yeah.
wormholes.
It's funny, just as you said that, this magpie appeared on my bench outside.
Oh, yeah, right.
The magpie at the window.
And suddenly dreams. I delivered a paper in Melbourne in 1980, and I had a dream, and it hit the press on page 3 of the Melbourne Age, and it was like such a shock for me because, you know, but I had a dream that was and a significant dream about going, being a woman on the plains, a wild woman on the plains with a spear.
Hmm.
And I even had words that came to me. So, and there are other dreams. Dreams are a significant place to listen.
To get that data for sure. Yeah, that connection. Hmm. Oh, it's been really lovely to talk to you and hear some more context to some of the Glennis experiences that I've had and the way that I am able to see you. But um, just as we close, I want to say something about a piece of land here, but I wanted to just ask if there's anything that you want to say just so you feel complete in the sharing. In the
Uh,
embodiment of the Pagayan cosmology that is there's your life that you've shared a small piece of today.
I'm just so pleased to speak with you today, um, because especially at this time of year when people are doing Christmas,
Mm,
and even good goddess people still do it, even though and still name the tree a Christmas tree when you know it has other roots, and I think we need to leave that kind of colonialism behind. And I know
yeah.
you and Lucas and Savannah, live authentically,
Mm.
and that's very meaningful. It's to speak with someone such as yourself at this time in particular, when sometimes I feel like I live on a different planet.
Mhm. I appreciate you saying that. It can feel very isolating to
Yes.
not partake, and yet to partake just feels so wrong to me. It's not as if someone invited me to a party they genuinely wanted me to come to, I could go celebrate with them in their space, but I just can't conjure it within myself at all. And I remember this is funny how the colonial wounds play out. My father would show up, mostly me, my brother wasn't interested, a number of our traditions, and they'd be wrapped up in the packagings of Christmas and Easter a lot of the time.
Yes.
And he would say that when I was a kid, well, we only do this on this day because the Christians made us move it, but this is what this tradition is about, etc. So when I became an adult and I said to him, well, I'm not going to celebrate Christmas or Christmas Eve anymore. I'm going to do the solstice and this. He was upset. And I was surprised. I guess to him it was like an attachment to this is as far as we've got, and this is what me and my people do. And I was, in my mind, I thought, I'm honoring you because
Yeah.
I'm taking the teachings to the level of putting it on the day that you said it belonged. So
That's right. I'm really jumping the fence. I'm really, yeah, that's right. That's
yeah,
right.
I
Yeah.
did not expect him to be sad about it. It's so
Oh,
interesting.
that's interesting. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
Yes.
The attachments, I think we just get to what we're
Yes.
used to, but um
But I appreciate that people gather. I see, on Christmas Day here, for instance, as I'm sitting on my veranda doing nothing, I see the neighbors pull out of their driveway with their Santa hats on. They're obviously going to some. So I appreciate that families gather, and many of my there's a family. I do live amongst people around here that I'm really, my family, but I
right,
don't go to any of the things, because they're all Christians.
right.
Um, but I was reflecting, I appreciate that people gather at this time
Hmm.
and see each other, are present to each other.
Yeah,
And so it's a time when people do that.
yeah. But to me, the reason really makes a big difference, and I can't pretend to be celebrating something that I don't feel. It's funny because we were going to play group recently. They had a few Santa toys and reindeer and things, and my child doesn't know what that is, right? So she picks up the Santa doll and she says, "I don't like this man," and throws it away. She doesn't know who it is. And then she picks up a reindeer and called it a yak. I didn't bother correcting her. I thought it was cute. Um, but yeah, I'll say something to someone else and they're like, "You don't do, she doesn't know Santa, you don't do Christmas," and it's just like I'm an alien or something. And I
Yes,
just I keep
yes,
repeating, well, no, with respect, I'm not Christian. Like it's
yes,
literally called Christmas. I don't do it.
yes,
I'm not Christian. I've never been Christian. But I, yeah, trying to get people together to gather around something else. Hopefully
yes,
next year we'll have a bit more
yes.
interest in a solstice feast or something instead.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
we did a Nova poll inspired by your
yes,
words
yes.
at the previous cross quarter, which was a lovely gathering feast, but it wasn't in competition of anything else. So.
Oh, as you speak, I must, if you would like, I have my ribbons, my Nova Pole ribbons that I don't use anymore.
Oh,
And I was wondering what home they could find.
oh, we would love to adopt your ribbons.
Yeah, so they used to be wrapped around the tree outside Mooncourt, and I made them all myself, and had to extend them, but perhaps I could
Oh,
give.
I'd love that, Glennis. We have an old, this place was originally built for horses. So we have an old pole where horses used to walk in the round. And so we use that little round for
That
it.
is so cool. I like the fact that horses used to do that because I like horses, right?
I do too. And it has a really nice energy, the space where the horses were. It's like a ceremonial space just because they had spent so much time on that round. It feels really nice.
I was actually born in the year of the horse, and so many of my friends and significant women are year of the horse.
There you go. Yeah, Lucas did an equine therapy program last year, and everybody was like eye open, including him, about how much a horse whisperer he was, and he had no idea. He just had this connection, and Savannah has something too. It'll be interesting to see how it grows. And now we're living on an old horse property, so there you go.
Yes, well, yes, and back to you doing events and ceremony there in your place. That will be a wonderful unfolding. Yes.
It's starting. It's that slow phase. Maybe you had this experience at Moon Court too, but since we're trying to set it up to be a bit bigger and people to be able to come stay for small stretches, it's a
Mm.
lot of legwork in the beginning, getting everything.
Yes. Yes. But yes, you're going to have we didn't have a residential, but aspect to it. If you've got that, it's a lot more work. Yes.
Yeah. Yes, well, we're going to start doing some first initial like laying ceremony into the land with a good friend of ours over Australia Day weekend because that felt like a very good decolonizing moment to do alternate ceremony here to set this in motion. So Yeah, we'll start a retreat series next year. We started having things come to us, so
Mm,
I'm excited to see. It's humbling. It's exciting.
yes.
It's been. I mean, we dreamed this up over 10 years ago. We started getting visions, and we thought it would take longer to come into being than this. So, yeah,
Yeah, well, I think it's quite urgent now
yeah.
because
That was
uh,
sort of the message we got. When we first saw this property, we thought it maybe feels a bit greedy. There's so much here. We thought we'd have to start with a lot less infrastructure. And Lucas got this really strong message. Just start. Like, you're not builders. Don't worry about building very many things. Just start doing what you do.
yeah, I've got chills as you're speaking there. Yes, yes,
Yeah.
just jump in because
Yeah.
it's needed. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let me thank you so much for that and the affirmation too, because the I feel a strength about the path, and at the same time, sometimes I look around and I'm just like, who is going to show up? Because everyone,
Well,
even
well, I say to Tabby, I said, well, I'm a crazy person, and we did used to call ourselves lunatics. In fact, Moonport's one of its names was possibly Lunatic Asylum.
there you go. Uh, um, yeah, I feel like no other way will work. So in that sense, I feel a sense of ease that I'm like, well, I've got to do it this way. Hopefully my child won't, come back to me at some point and say, you've alienated me from everybody, or it's what it is. You picked me as a mom for some reason. I don't know, but
Yeah, she's beautiful, Savannah. It's lovely.
yeah. She's quite a powerful little thing. Um, yeah, so let me close with talking about a piece of land. I'll say this, it's a slight nostalgic because I don't think we'll go there much anymore. And it closed on a traumatic experience for our dog, but there was this place near where Savannah was born, outside of Maruya, sort of behind town, where there's a creek and it's the edge of a national park. And I guess we call it Wambin Creek. There's a one-lane wooden bridge that goes over this creek, and it's a swimming spot that you can go, and there's a little area where you can sort of plunge, but mostly I would just go there with Savannah when she was little, and she'd throw rocks in the water and we'd have a little dip and our dog would swim. For some reason, it just always felt um, like very sweet and innocent, and there were rarely any other people there. And when they were really sweet and friendly, and it just felt like this little special spot that we used to go. Um, and then one of the last times we were there before we moved down to the land where we are now, um, just as we were leaving, Lucas was holding Chloe on the lead, and we were walking back to the car, and somebody who lived on the property right next to there came out with their dog, and it was a mom and a dad and a kid and their dog, and the dog just raced over to Chloe and started attacking her out of nowhere. And she was literally at Lucas's side being held on the lead. And Lucas was in this awkward position of having to like put his own body in danger, kicking the dog, or let the dog hurt Chloe. Like, what do you do, kind of thing? He's yelling and, trying to nudge the dog away. Um, and the owners did nothing. And it was such a bizarre experience. The woman just seemed like completely on a cloud of maybe marijuana or something that's very off. The little boy acted like nothing was happening and just went in for a swim. And then the man came over and started yelling at us. And it came out in his yelling that um, his dog had been doing this a number of times, and was, if he got reported again to council, would potentially have to be put down. Um, and obviously this man was very scared that we were going to report his dog. So it was this whole sort of bizarre experience, and I felt bad for the dog actually because I felt like neither of the adults were
Right.
uh, able to help the dog feel safe, and so the dog was seeing threats that weren't there. Um, and who knows about the child, who seemed very checked out, but um, the woman eventually came over and gave us a number of a mobile vet, which ended up being quite useful, and we got her to agree to pay half of the cost, which I thought was generous on our part. um, but and Chloe healed really well, and it was actually lovely to have the vet come to the home. But it was this real, like, kind of whoa trauma moment for us, and it changed the way I felt about that place. And we did go back there after. I didn't want that to be like the lasting memory, and we had a little swim and a play. But and I would go there again, but now it's like an hour's drive to go to a creek is not something I'll do that often. But yeah, that it's interesting. That was the place that was coming to me, this sense of like it had this innocence, and then there was this trauma that changed it, and now it's more complex. And it's not this like um this little haven of a place anymore. I don't know why I'm feeling moved to share that place story, but that's my experience with Wambin Creek. And we had a similar experience where Savannah was born, where we were in this sweet little place, and we had the sense the landlords there were very um encouraging and sweet about us having a kid. And then not long after she was born said they didn't want a kid on the property, and it was a liability, and we needed to leave, and it was all very sudden and odd. And so there's this curious shift that we had with that place where it felt like safe, and then all of a sudden it felt not safe. It felt welcoming, and then all of a sudden there was this other energy there. Um, and that's where my little girl was born, on land where that we had those experiences. So that's that's my land story today. I don't know why.
Yeah, I think it's very. I mean, I think it's a microcosm of the larger picture, really,
Mm,
that we live in. And so many cultures have such a similar story of an innocence, which is, in my mind, innocence is about connection. It's a connection
mhm,
place, and that's what innocence really is,
mm,
to my mind. Um,
mm.
and then there's complexification. Then there's trauma. There's something that happens, and and that's been going on, of course, for a long time. In
Right,
and we live in a world that's traumatized.
right,
And partly and very complex, even with the best of intentions. Sometimes, sometimes with good intention, it's still very complex. So that's, I see your story as kind of
mm,
a microcosm of what is. This is what
mm.
we live in, a complex reality that we have to negotiate.
It's a challenge to protect children from those
Yes,
dynamics when that's
yes, that's
environment.
right.
Mm,
Raising children in that
mm.
context, and as well as being in that context yourself, but raising a child to understand connection as well as the complex world that they will step into and are in. Yes.
It's amazing how forgiving the earth is, isn't it? Just constantly forgiving and sort of waiting for us to heal and reconnect. And Mm. It's always there when we can peel back the layers and land again.
Yes.
Mm. You said something to me once about how um, when you weren't able to communicate with somebody, you dug and dug and dug inside yourself until you just found this deep well of love and in relation to them, and then you just sat there. Um, and that really helped me. I'm thinking of that now as we're closing, and that really helped me as well with some of my own ways of relating to like the estrangement in my family. Just sitting in that well of love and just waiting, and maybe people will meet me there in this life or not, but just
Yes, yes, that's right. That connection, yes, the connection with that person that you're speaking about, is often in my dreams. So I know
mm,
the connection's there,
yeah,
and probably that's the only place it can really be, in this. present life.
In this reality.
Because in
Yeah.
the social context, it just is too much stuff.
Yes, there's the earthly context and the social context, and they do not align a lot of the time.
No, that's right. You just have to say, "Oh well." I guess that's what indigenous, like the Indian, East Indian traditions call Maya. But it's not that it's not real. That's the only difference. It's not that it's not real. It is real, but
Right.
it's yes.
Mm. That's the space it can be. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for dialoguing. It's been really beautiful, Glennis.
Yes, thank you, Valerie.
Big
Oh,
blessings. Enjoy this time of sun.
yes, turning into the dark. You see, as we're turning into the dark cycle, which is when you and Lucas did a lot of those ceremonies. Yeah.
Right. Well, you're just constantly embodying your work. It's so lovely.
Thank you, Valerie. Lovely to talk with you.
Hi, Glennis.